Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Cast of Kings, an unofficial podcast about the HBO original series Game of Thrones. I'm David Chen, and I haven't read most of the books in George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire.
I'm Joanna Robinson. I've read every book in George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire.
And welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. What we do here on this podcast is we recap every episode of Game of Thrones on HBO, but we don't spoil anything from future week's episodes. That includes anything on the Next Time On preview, anything from the books. You can find more episodes of this podcast at gameofthronespodcast.com. You can also email us at acastofkings@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at acastofkings, facebook.com/acastofkings. And before we begin today, I want to make a couple announcements. First of all, just wanted to say we are so honored that Vulture chose us as one of the top 5 Game of Thrones podcasts in existence right now, right? I was so happy to see this. They also chose your other Game of Thrones podcast, Storm of Spoilers, as well, Joanna. So you're, I think, the only person on that list to make 2 entries, right?
I mean, it's a short list, but yes, it's true. Yeah,
but
it was
yes,
so sweet. It was really nice.
It was very nice, and of course, we're all big fans of the work that Vulture does. So super excited to see that we had such good company on this list too. A lot of my favorites on that list. So thanks to Vulture for highlighting our show. And of course, if you're a fan of this podcast and want to recommend us to your friends, please do so. Also, if you left us a review or a star rating on Apple Podcasts, we'd really appreciate that. Another announcement I want to make is if I sound a little bit different, it's because I'm still fighting off a sinus infection and my throat is like really kind of still kind of shredded from this most recent illness I've had. So sorry if I sound a little bit weird or a little bit less energy, lower energy than usual. I've just been really struggling with the health these last few weeks, Joanna. Must have been this week's episode really put me in a bad place.
Sinus infections not as easy to cure as grayscale.
That's
apparently.
correct. No, I mean, I wish I had grayscale, Joanna, because at least then it's over. You know what I mean? Like you do the bad night of debridement or whatever it's called, and then it's over.
Sure.
Anyway, so all that being said, want to talk about some of the emails we've been receiving at acastofkings@gmail.com. We're always grateful for all the emails we receive each week. And this week, Joanna, you're going to read a couple emails for us, right? Because my voice is completely shot.
Yeah, I wanted to start with just a couple things. First of all, we got a lot of emails of people giving their perspective on our discussion about the Littlefinger Bran dagger scene that happened in last week's episode. And a lot of people seem to, I don't know if I did a poor job of explaining myself, but a lot of people seem to misinterpret my issues with that scene as not understanding why Littlefinger would want to curry favor with Bran, and that's not the case at all. I completely understand why Littlefinger would want to get in like with the, potential Lord of Winterfell, even though Bran's like, I can't do it. I'm gifted. I can't. And we also know that, giving gifts has worked in the past for him. Like that's basically how he controlled Robin of House Aaron. He just like would bring him gifts, and Robin was so stupid and whatever that he would just do whatever Uncle Peter told him. I think so that was not my issue. A lot of people were like, don't you understand why Littlefinger would want Bran's approval? Yes, I do. My issue is more with the way the show has been writing Littlefinger over the past few seasons. I think doesn't quite gel with what we knew of him in the first few seasons, which is that this is a man who takes his time and really understands the psychology of the players as he plays the game. So, for example, I had an issue a couple seasons ago when he just gave Sansa over to Ramsay without really doing his research on who Ramsay was. And it feels like, once again, he didn't do any research on who Bran was before he made a play. You know what I mean? Everyone's like, how could he know Bran was the way he was? Well, if I were Littlefinger, I would hang back, find out who Bran was, and then I would make a decision on how best to approach him. Do you know what I mean? Which is a little bit more, I guess, what we're seeing him do with Arya and Sansa a little bit this week. But that was sort of my issue with what happened with Bran and Littlefinger. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is he didn't. If he was trying to make a play, he didn't execute it super well, right?
Right, and that's just not very Littlefinger.
Yeah.
The last thing I will say that someone someone put it this way, and I don't think it necessarily excuses some of the patchy character work, but it is a nice bit of symmetry of Ned Stark going to King's Landing in season 1 and being completely out of his element and being sort of like tossed here and there by people like Littlefinger. And then this is the reverse. Here's Littlefinger coming into Ned's home, Winterfell, and not really being able to get a handle on all of the players there. Do you know what I mean? So like that, if that's intentional, that's clever, but it comes at the cost of this particular player who has been so sharp for so long. Do you know? So, but we see him, pull off some machinations this week, which we'll talk about later. The other thing that I want to talk about is we got a couple questions pertaining to this week's episode about the rules of succession in Westeros. And the rules of succession means who takes the throne after when a king or a queen dies, who's next in line. That's what the rules of succession means. And we actually have George R. R. Martin on the record talking about what the rules are in Westeros when it comes to like men and women and blah, blah. And the answer is kind of there are no rules. This is a quote from Martin himself. He says, "The short answer is that the laws of inheritance in the Seven Kingdoms are modeled on those in real medieval history, which is to say they were vague, uncodified, subject to varying interpretations, and often contradictory. A man's eldest son was his heir, after that the next eldest son, then the next, etc. Daughters were not considered while there was a living son, except in Dorne, where females had equal right of inheritance according to age. After the sons, most would say the eldest daughter is next in line, but there might be an argument from the dead man's brothers, say, does a male sibling or a female child take precedence? Each side has a claim. What if there are no children, only grandchildren and great-grandchildren? Is precedence or proximity the more important principle? Do bastards have any rights? What about bastards who have been legitimized? Do they go in at the end after the true-born kids or according to birth order? What about widows? What about the will of the deceased? Can a lord disinherit one son and name a younger son as an heir or even a bastard? There are no clear-cut answers either in Westeros or in real medieval history. Things are often decided on a case-by-case basis. A case might set precedent for later cases, but as often as not, the precedents conflicted as much as the claims. In fact, if you look at medieval history, conflicting claims were the cause of 3/4 of the wars." So we'll get into this a little bit later, but this is a question that I got a lot when it comes to, we know that the last Targaryen king to sit on the Iron Throne was the Mad King Aerys. We know his son was Rhaegar Targaryen. We know Rhaegar's sister is Daenerys Targaryen. So Daenerys is claiming her right by being like sort of the last living person in that line. But if Jon Snow is the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and is his legitimate son, as in like Rhaegar Targaryen married Jon's mother, we'll talk about this later, that actually gives him a better claim because it goes down through the male line. So that would put Jon in front of Daenerys for the throne, which we can talk about later.
Yeah.
But
what was the context that this question came up again in?
Just in terms of that, in that question,
gotcha.
Does Daenerys people have been asking this question for a while because it seems like the show has sort of tossed out some of the rules, and Cersei's claim is a little dubious at best and that sort of stuff. But the question of whether Jon would have a better claim than Daenerys, the answer is Jon. Something that helps me understand it is if you go to the Wikipedia page for the current British monarchy, which I think we're all at least passing familiar with. It goes Queen Elizabeth, Prince Charles, Prince William, and then Prince William's son, Prince George. Like Harry is not in front of George. It goes down the line like that. So anyway, that's the laws of succession, the rules of succession. So the answer is there are rules until there aren't any, I guess, from George R. R. Martin.
Gotcha.
And one last thing before we dive into the episode. This one comes from Steve Alvarez, or Steve A. from New York City. And he says, hi, David and Joanna. The subject line is crediting directors. Hi, David and Joanna. Do we really understand what it means to be credited as a director on Game of Thrones? Each individual episode inevitably features scenes that are filmed across numerous countries, if not a few continents. Do the directors of these episodes really travel this much to direct each of these episodes? Wouldn't it make more sense logistically for the directors to be responsible for scenes that are filmed regionally? If so, are directors credited according to screen time, or do they take turns receiving credit? Or could it be that credit is assigned according to editing duties? Thank you for reading.
Yeah.
So
this is a really good question. I've had this question too,
Yeah.
about the fact that Game of Thrones is shot in so many different locations. Why bother having like all these different directors like fly to all these different places? Wouldn't it make sense for like one director be one place? Of course, there are advantages to having a director direct an episode. He or she can shape the feel, the beginning, middle, and end of that episode, and of course, bring their technical knowledge to bear on the specific elements of that episode. Joanna, you have some thoughts on this, right?
Yeah, there was a behind the scenes sort of featurette that I believe came out pegged to season 5, which gives a really good look at some of the production logistics and who flies where. Basically, Weiss and Benioff, the two showrunners, are constantly continent hopping, and the same is true of the directors. But there are also just units that stay in Ireland or in Spain. There are line producers that stay in certain places to add stabilities, but the directors are going around from place to place. That being said, I did interview Jack Bender last season when he did the episode The Door, and then I forget what he did, 2 back to back. I forget what the other one was called. And there were some scenes in his episode, like the fake play that Ari was watching in Bravos, that also took place in another director's episode. Also some of Brand's visions. And so I asked him, I was like, did you film every single moment of your episode? And he said, no, there were a few things that I didn't shoot. So I think in those cases, when there's something like the fake play in Bravos that would overlap, 2 different episodes, one director or another might do it. But for the most part, the directors are taking on the continent hopping duties of directing these episodes.
Right. I also believe sometimes they'll use what's called a second unit. So the director might not actually even be on set for like a specific action scene or something like maybe the play you're talking about. I mean, in that case, it sounded like it was a different director's episode, but for the most part, yeah, it does sound like the directors are traveling around and they are kind of putting their creative stamp on the episode insofar as they can on a TV show. So. Well, very cool. Thanks to everyone for writing in. You can always write to us at acastofkings@gmail.com. Joanna, let's get to today's episode, Season 7, Episode 5, Eastwatch. This one is also directed by Matt Shackman, who directed last week's episode, and is written by Dave Hill. And as the episode begins, something rather stunning happens. We actually got another bit of the opening credits. We got to see Eastwatch in the opening credits, right? Mm-hmm. Which I think this season also gave us Old Town for the first time. Am I right about that? I think so, right? So it's cool that they're still adding components to the map this late in the game.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still sad we'll probably never seen Casterly Rock or High Garden, but yeah, it is fun that we got Eastwatch and Old Town this season.
Yeah.
Yes.
So before we dive into like a plot point by plot point dissection of the episode, let's just talk generally about things we really liked about this episode. I want to start us off on a positive note. So Joanna, let's talk about a few things you liked about this episode. What was great?
I think my favorite, there are a few key character moments in, me, I love character moments, and that really got me. So probably my favorite would be the scene between Tyrion and Jaime Lannister, just because I actually think that's maybe the most acting we've seen Peter Dinklage do in a while. I've complained for a while that I feel like the series is kind of wasting him, and it just felt like when he was back with Nicola Coster-Waldau, who plays Jamie, that he sort of unlocked something that I haven't seen in him for a while. He was talking about his dad and his pain and all of that. And I thought Nicola was also really good in that scene. And then I'm sorry, I thought the Jon Snow Pets a Dragon scene was absolutely breathtaking, like visually stunning, and also I don't know, really emotionally rewarding.
I agree completely. It reminded me of a very similar scene in the movie How to Train Your Dragon. Where like a human interacts with a dragon for the first time and experiences that connection. It's like a very beautiful moment, and I thought it was beautifully rendered in this episode. So, agreed completely. Anything else?
I don't. Those are my standout. I'm sure I'll get to some of my other favorites later. How about you?
Well, Jorah gets to wear something even better than his ratty old shirt.
Oh
right?
God, how could I have missed
He got almost like
Jorah's
he
new
almost got
outfit?
like armor and stuff, right?
Oh my God, yeah, he's got like a leather breastplate. He's got an amazing billowy cape. And then when they went up north, he got like a fur-lined cloak. He got like many different looks. I feel like the costume designers were like, Michelle Clapton was maybe like, sorry for the yellow shirt. I'm going to give you like 3 looks in one episode. Your cape gets pinned in many different ways. You're quite dapper. Here you go, Sir Jorah. So, yes.
Yeah, good stuff. I'm going to pause for 1 second. Sorry.
Oh, no.
Okay.
You're fine.
I actually have already been muting many times, but sometimes I just can't get to it in time. Okay, here we go. The other thing I'll mention, Joanna, is I kind of liked Gendry's reintroduction. I don't know that I thought it was very character-driven, but I liked when he got to the boat and he takes out those 2 guys. And there's a very kind of 80s action moment, like 80s movie action moment, like when he kills these guys and Davos introduces him and he's like, "This is Gendry," and Tyrion says, "He'll do," like in a very kind of like almost like we're watching like a heist movie or something. I thought that was very delightful. So there's definitely a few moments that I really appreciated in this episode. That being said, Joanna.
Yes.
Overall, I'd have to say this is one of my least favorite episodes of the entire series.
Wow.
And and as a way into that, I'm going to read an email from one of our amazing listeners. And we got a few emails like this one, and I just when I was reading them, I just thought, oh yes, I agree so much. Haikal emails into us from Malaysia. Haikal writes into castofkings@gmail.com. Long-time listener, first-time writer, just need to vent after a really sloppy episode in what has otherwise been a good season. The opening of this episode was so disappointing, I had to pause it for a couple of minutes to fully process it. The writers, for whatever reason, picked the lamest explanation for last week's cliffhanger by having Bronn and Jaime just pop up a mile away from where they were with no repercussions. Jaime didn't even remove his armor. Are we supposed to believe that after diving into the water in the heart of the battle, that they somehow stayed submerged all the way to where we find them? This is the textbook definition of anticlimactic. Either or both of them getting captured and or killed would have been so much more interesting. This is compounded by the fact that Tyrion has to then sneak into King's Landing to tell Jaime one of the most misbegotten ideas in the show's history. Wouldn't it have been much more interesting if Jaime was captured but has to convey the message to Cersei, his non-execution being a fig leaf in and of itself? And wouldn't it have been more powerful if Bronn was one of those burned alive, in addition to the Tarleys who have been dicks 90% of the time? I'm going to stop there because I want to get back to Haikal's email later on in the podcast, Joanna.
Okay.
But let's start with this opening scene, which is, something that you called last week, that Jaime would still be alive. You're right, Joanna. You got that one. But
it's a shocker. The boldest prediction of all time.
The tonnage of that prediction could stop a whole team of oxen in its track.
Right.
I mean, yeah, a lot of people predicted that he would still be alive. You did
well,
as well.
Actually, a lot of people wrote into us after last week's episode to say I didn't even consider it a cliffhanger.
Yeah,
it didn't even occur to me for a second that it was a cliffhanger.
That's right.
Which is interesting.
Several people emailed and said, yeah, didn't even think it was a cliffhanger. Don't know why you thought it was a cliffhanger. Okay, that is a very charitable reading, right? Like people saying it's not a cliffhanger, right? That's a very charitable way of reading the episode. It's like the episode is not trying to mislead you in any way. Right? So even if I accept that that's true, isn't the resolution of the Jaime situation a bit, I don't know, all these adjectives are rushing into my mind right now. Rushed, lame, incredibly convenient. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is I would be okay with the ending we got last week and Jaime still being alive if maybe they showed a little bit of what had happened in between, last week and then this week, them emerging on shore like completely unscathed. Do you know what I'm saying? Like if it was like some big action scene of them, like Bronn dragging him through the water and like fighting for his life. It felt like almost insulting the way it was resolved this week so conveniently. What did you think of the opening scene, Joanna?
I mean, it was what I expected to happen, so I wasn't like disappointed by it. But and I, the thing is, like, Jerome Flynn is so charming as Braun that, like, even when nothing makes sense, you're kind of at least a little bit along for the ride. But that being said, we actually got several emails, not just sort of the one that you just read, but we got several emails, or at least I've seen several emails of people being like, why didn't they have Daenerys capture Jaime? And then, like, the whole part where Tyrion talks to Jaime happens while he's captured.
Right.
And then they, like, return Jaime to King's Landing. And when they do that, then Davos can pick up Gendry. And there's just, like, a lot of thematic and interesting, and Bronn. I mean, really, someone we cared about should have died in, if the showrunners are going to brag about how they're, which they did last week, which was a great episode. We all agreed. But if they're going to brag about how they're setting up this amazing episode where you've got people you care about on two sides of a battle, then someone you care about should probably die as a result of that battle. Not that we wanted them to, but like,
or at least be captured or experience some consequences from it,
right, or like singed or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, like, and the show has. I was aware that Dickon Tarley was going to die this season, and so I could see that the seams of the show working very hard to establish him as a character whose name we remembered. That's why I think they had that Dickon Rickon running joke.
Right.
A name we remembered and a character who was quasi-sympathetic, so that when he burned, we kind of had this false sense that someone we cared about died, but really, like, we don't really care about the Tarleys. Not really. You know what I mean? And so then nobody we cared about, except like RIP some horses, died in this huge show-stopping battle in the penultimate season of Game of Thrones. This is the time when, from the start, the show has been very much about, like, anyone can die at any time. Ned Stark can die. Catelyn Stark can die. Who knows? Oberyn Martell can die. But I've been saying this for a while now. I feel like ever since Jon Snow came back that, like, it feels so safe now.
Yeah.
And, like, but it's the penultimate season. Like, you can start killing major characters. It's allowed. And, I guess the biggest death we've had this season is Olenna, which matters, but she's still a very minor character. So, the season's not over yet, but that's something that I've railed about before, which is just sort of false stakes of Game of Thrones in the later seasons. And that's what that battle episode feels like to me. That being said, I think Jerome Flynn and Nikolai Coster-Waldau did the best that they could with that kind of silly circumstance that they were given, where they washed up downstream and, walked soggily home. I don't know. So,
it just felt like, they washed up downstream so that they weren't captured. It just was like so convenient that, like, everything was fine for them. And we had a question last week of why would Bronn save Jaime's life? And you posited that maybe it's because he lost his gold, so he still wants the money. And that seems to have been proven true by this opening kind of monologue or not monologue, but that seems to have been proven true by this opening exchange that they have, right?
Right. I think that settles what the show feels like. The reason that Bronn put himself on the line for Jaime was for his own self-interest. It's funny. We got a couple emails this week. I don't know if you noticed this. We got a couple emails this week where, like, after episode 4, people wrote us really long emails about, like, I think you misunderstand. I think it's this. I think it's that. That's not, unusual. But then after episode 5, which aired on Sunday, we got a couple people go, never mind.
Yeah.
Please disregard the previous email. You know what I mean?
Essentially, like, a lot of people defending episode 4 from our critiques, and then a couple people then, like, recanting on their defenses of episode 4 after episode 5 aired. I thought that was hilarious. It
was pretty funny. And we weren't that critical of episode 4, but, like, our one thing was this cliffhanger, which resolved in sort of the, like, silliest / convenient way possible.
Yes. It was extremely silly. And borderline insulting, as I've said. So,
well.
All right. Well, anyway, we see Tyrion walking through the wreckage, and it's actually quite beautiful. Like, all this ash that he's walking through, this wreckage of war. It's chilling, and leads to this scene where survivors gather around Daenerys, and this camera move, it's like a tilt, I think, like a tilt upwards, if I recall correctly, or maybe it was a crane shot going upwards. Whatever it was, I thought it was absolutely spectacular. Where it's like this begins as a conventional camera move with these Lannister men, and then you see this freaking enormous dragon, behind them, like in the background, as Daenerys stands between them and the dragon. Beautiful shot. And Daenerys gives them a choice. You can either kneel, bend the knee right now, or you can die. So definitely a different choice than she gave Jon. And I think later on, she like Tyrion explains the rationale for like why she didn't give Jon that ultimatum is that Jon did not fight her in battle, right? Like Jon did not try and actively kill her, right?
Right.
So most
people to treat with her diplomatically,
right?
Yeah.
As the kids say these days. But most people kneel, but Randall and Dick and Tarly don't kneel. Tyrion tries to reason with both the Tarleys and with Daenerys, and be like, "Hey, this is not a good idea for you to kill these dudes." And then she kills them, and in a rather spectacular fashion, and so spectacular that basically everyone else bends the knee and kneels to Daenerys. So, what did you think of this scene? Like, excuse me. What did you think of this scene, Joanna? I felt like, I felt like the show wanted me to have more emotions towards the Tarleys than I actually had. Like we saw them be a dick to Sam, I think last season. Yeah. And then, Dickon gets this kind of sympathetic moment last episode. And you kind of get a sense of what, the Tarly Sr.'s motivation is, right? With his monologue this episode, and also like Jaime trying to turn him and then him eventually joining Jaime last episode. But I didn't really get a good, like, I didn't.
But his motivation is racism. I mean, like xenophobia.
Yeah. So, are we supposed to feel bad for him? I guess I didn't understand, right?
I think we're supposed to feel bad for him a little bit when he like doesn't want Dickon to follow him. You know what I mean? He's like, no. I mean, I feel some twinges of something, but the truth is, I think one of the reasons why, well, I don't want to speak for you. One of the reasons why so many people have an issue with this episode and maybe this season in general is I feel like you can just really feel they are trying to barrel along to the end. Right. And they're just going to go. And it's like things happen. And it's like Tyrion goes from here to Dragonstone to King's Landing, or like, people are up at Eastwatch. Like it's crazy what happens. And I'm not even talking about time or travel. I'm just talking about like just crazy things happening in one episode. Like
right.
It's insane that this, where we are by the end of this episode is insane.
I know a lot of people have been bringing that up, in response to my criticisms, but that's actually not one of my issues with this episode at all. Like I've kind of started to let go of the whole logistics. I don't have a problem with how quickly it's moving.
I wasn't saying logistics. I'm saying the problem you have, or my interpretation of the problem that you've had this episode is sort of a lot of logic gaps in convenient storytelling.
Sure.
And that's what they're doing in order to press all the pieces where they need to be by the end of this episode to give us the next spectacular thing they want to give us. Right. And so, no, I completely agree with you. I haven't heard you complain about logistics. I don't think it's about logistics, but it is about like speed of plot acceleration.
Yeah. I'll cop to that. And most of the time I think that like in the case of the Tarly stuff, it's fairly inoffensive. Like it didn't really work on me, but it's not like I was bothered by it or anything like that. So.
Right, but if they had given us I really, I've been chewing this over for a little while now, and I really feel like probably they needed cringe if you want, and HBO is like hearing the cash registered drawer ka-ching, but I think they really needed 4 more seasons to get out all that they need to get out before the end of the show. But they're not doing that. I don't want to make major assumptions on the behalf of people that I don't know, but I feel like, and I've heard this from other people, that it feels like the showrunners Weiss and Benioff are ready to be done and move on to the next thing.
Hmm.
And so they're like, we're doing 7 episodes, then 6 episodes, and we're done. And HBO's like, how about no? And how about more? And they're like, no, we're doing this. And so I feel like with more space to breathe, something like the Tarleys could have been done very well, because like what if we spent a whole season with the Tarleys and getting to know them as human beings?
Yeah.
And so then by the end of the season when Daenerys torches them, we're like, oh my God, rather than like a few scenes cobbled here and there. I say all this, I've actually made my peace with it. I'm fine with what the show is now, which is sort of like this sped up fan fiction of George R. R. Martin's saga is how it feels to me. But
it's like fan fiction viewed from like a bullet train, basically.
But you know, I see what they were trying to do with the Tarleys. They just didn't have enough time. They had like 3 scenes to do it. You know what I mean? And so like that's what they wanted to do. It didn't really work on me. It might have worked on some people. It didn't work on me. But you know, if we were operating under the old rules of Game of Thrones, it's something like, I don't know, the redemption of Jaime Lannister, where we get a whole season of Jaime and Brienne on the road, and our feelings about Jaime Lannister, who was a villain, like change, and we're like, oh my God, what are we feeling? What is this? This is crazy. And you know, they could have done something similar if they had had more time, but they decided to not have more time. And so as a result, we get like barbecued Tarleys. In a way that, you know, is kind of effective, spectacular, like visually spectacular, but not really making me feel super conflicted about Daenerys, especially since she like barbecued an entire like all the calls that ever were of the Dothraki. She barbecued about, like this is what she's been doing the whole time. And so it doesn't seem like a big crazy difference to me.
Yeah. On that note, methinks Tyrion doth protest too much. You know, he's getting all upset that she's barbecuing these dudes. It's like, this is war, man. I mean, you gotta like, she's getting her hands dirty and behaving fairly. The times that she's listened to you and not done it is when she's failed the most, and then she did the thing that she wanted to do, and now she's actually like making some progress here.
Yeah.
So
Tyrion's advice has not been like, I've been saying this for a while, not good. Anyway,
well, it gets even worse, Joanna.
Yeah. Okay.
So Jaime goes back to King's Landing. He passes Qyburn on the way to Cersei's chambers, and then tries to explain to her how overwhelming the Dothraki and the dragons were, how they burned 1,000 wagons, and all these horrible things. And you know, she insists, "Hey, we're going to keep fighting." He tries to convince her otherwise, trying to figure out another path forward, and also drops the news that Olenna killed Joffrey, not Tyrion. And that's when I think Cersei tells Jaime that she's pregnant, right?
No, that's a separate scene. Basically, we get one scene where Cersei has one attitude, and then he meets with Tyrion and he comes back and she has a very different attitude, and that's because in between time, like Qyburn has confirmed to her that she's pregnant, and so her attitude about like how they should deal with Daenerys is very different, because she's like, I've got this other thing to be fighting for now.
That's right.
You know, so the first time they see each other, she's very much like, well, you know, I fight and die, or I give up and die. I know what my path forward is, basically like fight and die. And then later when she's talking to him, she's like, well, I've got this thing to protect, and it's my baby and our baby. And so that matters to me. And so I think that's also when he tells her about the Olenna reveal, because, you know, he's talking to Tyrion about stuff. Or no, you're right. It's in the first scene. Yeah. So anyway, I think we're supposed to see you know, we see Qyburn in both of those situations, and it feels like, you know, in the first time he sees her, she's like, what's up? Can you figure it out? And the second time Qyburn sees her, he's like, yep, it's true. You're pregnant. I know a lot of people think Cersei's not pregnant, that she's lying. I don't think that's true by any stretch of the imagination. I don't know that she will bring this baby to term, and I wrote a piece about this over on VF.com, which you can read about. But I don't think there's any way in the world that Cersei Lannister is lying about being pregnant right now. So,
just out of curiosity, I mean, so we know from the prophecy from, I think, season 4, right?
5.
Season 5, from Maggie the Frog, that Cersei will only have 3 children, right? Now, that's ignoring the child that she mentioned in season 1 of the show that was a show invention, right? But
not quite a show invention. Like, she aborted that child in the books, and in the show, she like carried it to term, and it died in infancy, I believe.
Right.
So, yeah.
So if we take Maggie the Frog's prophecy at face value, then either Cersei will die, or her child will not be carried to term, or Cersei's lying. Right? Those are basically the only choices. So what is your ration? I mean, I believe that Cersei is pregnant. I think it's stupid to lie about pregnancy. I mean, did anyone see Glee season 1, guys? Come on. It's kind of like a Ponzi scheme to me. Like, eventually people are gonna find out.
Well, a lot of people who think that she's lying are saying she's lying to manipulate Jaime, and I agree that she's emotionally manipulating Jaime in that scene. But I think she also is feeling genuine hope and happiness over this baby, because she thought she wasn't going to have another baby because of the prophecy, you know, and all 3 of her children died according to the prophecy. And so she finds out she's pregnant, and she's like, oh my God, maybe I could be a mother again. And being a mother, however shitty Joffrey was, like, Tom and Marcella are pretty great, and being a mother was very important to her. And so I don't think she's lying at all. Here's my explanation, which is that or here's some added value that I will give you, which is that in the book A Feast for Crows, like, book readers have suspected for a long time that Cersei might be pregnant, because in A Feast for Crows, which is 2 books ago in the Song of Ice and Fire series, Cersei's dresses were like tight around the middle. And there was like this long debate. It's like flashback to last year when we were all debating about Sansa. It's like a lot of book readers were like, well, no, she's just getting fat because she's drinking too much wine and like all this sort of stuff. And then other people are like, no, she's pregnant. But there's this other scene in that book where Cersei goes to have a breakfast and she opens an egg and there's like a stillborn chick in there, which a lot of people took to be like portentous of her having a miscarriage. So there was already this sort of buzz among the book reader community that Cersei was A, pregnant, and B, was going to miscarry. And you know, the show has done a number of times. The show has taken something that happened in the book a while ago and sort of move it up and execute it. So that's why I suspect that she will miscarry, or not, or die before she brings the child to term. But I don't think she's lying about being pregnant.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens with that. I'm not looking forward to that episode. Yeah. But I think it's inevitable.
But I mean, thematically, it makes a lot of sense, because if you Weiss and Benioff in the behind the scenes interview from episode 1 of this season talked a lot about how Cersei has never really reckoned with her children dying, and how when she finally does, it'll be a long fall. Like, this is something they said in the behind the scenes interview. And so for me, that feels like they're laying track to, like, if she does miscarry this baby, like, then she finally maybe will reckon with the fact that she lost all of her children, and that will be her emotional unraveling. The prophecy says, you know, we talked last week about the Valonqar prophecy about the little brother who will murder Cersei,
right, which was in the books but not in the show, right?
And the words of that prophecy are like, one, like, you know, gold will be their crowns and gold their shrouds, and once you've drowned in your tears, the Valonqar will come and wrap his fingers around your throat. And so it's like Cersei hasn't done that part where she like really mourns her children, you know? So that feels like something that might happen.
Yeah, it might. Of course, the show is also free to completely deviate from that, because
absolutely
that part of the prophecy was not in the show. So anyway, moving on. Drogon lands at Dragonstone. There's this kind of really awesome looking shot that shows Jon at the edge of the cliff, and then Jon reaches out and touches Drogon. We talked about this earlier on in this podcast episode. Incredible moment. I thought it was really well done, like the dragon skin kind of moving under his hands and stuff. And it feels like kind of a big deal that Jon can kind of tame this dragon in some way. I know, like, Tyrion kind of did a similar thing when he chained the dragons up a couple seasons ago, but this feels like kind of different, and I was interested that it was not remarked upon by Dany. She kind of gives it a little like eyebrow raise, but that's about it, and then just move on to the next scene. But you write here in the show notes, this is a big damn deal. I thought it was too. The show kind of just breezes past it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the show breezed past a lot of things in this episode. I feel like they're just laying a seed that they're going to pay off later, basically. And this was one of them. But basically, I wrote more explainers for this episode than I have for any other episode, and that's
Right.
because the show is doing a thing now where it just sort of like drops something and then rolls on, and it's like, okay, you can either do the extracurricular homework on this or we'll explain it later. But they're not like really concerned with an episode of really laying it out for you, which is, I don't know, it could be good or bad. I loved this scene, as I mentioned before, with Jon and Drogon. It does feel like a big deal. Yes, Tyrion did technically put his hand on a dragon in season 6. Mostly he just like unshackled them. They didn't like love him the way that Drogon seems to love Jon. I would be, did you go to you went to the Paula Fairfield panel at Con of Thrones, right?
I did.
Drogon makes a sound in this scene that I would be really curious to hear. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, Paula Fairfield is the sound designer for Game of Thrones, for those who don't know.
So she does all the dragon sounds, and she talked on this panel that Dave went to about sort of like how every year she layers new sounds into the dragons as they grow. And didn't it like originate with her dogs or something like that? Like
I don't remember that, but I remember her saying it is now dozens of animals is what makes up the dragon sound. Yeah.
So Drogon makes this sound, this like really like almost like a dragon version of a purr or something sound for Jon that did not happen for Tyrion. So it feels like a very big deal. Yeah.
So great scene. He and Daenerys talk about the dragons and how she views them as her children. Which, by the way, I don't remember who pointed this out, Joanna, but there is some kind of like. Do you feel that there's any kind of mirror reflection-esque thing of like Dany with her 3 dragons and like Cersei, like is it, like they're kind of like diametrically opposed in some way, but they all have 3 children, and like kind of love them despite the fact that they might perform atrocities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There is a scene. I'm trying to remember what season it's after Joffrey's dead. I think it's season 4 where Cersei's talking to Marjorie, and she says, "You never love anything as much as you love your first child, no matter what they do." And she's talking about she's like, "Some of the things that Joffrey did shocked me, and do you think I'm shocked easily?" And Daenerys is something very similar here, where she's like, "They're not beasts, no matter how big they grow, no matter how much people are terrified by them, they're my children." It's a very conscious echoing of dialogue between those two scenes. And and I think it is it never occurred to me before this episode to think of Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen as like Cersei's 3 dragons, but they kind of are, because like Drogon I think is the only dragon who really stepped out and torched a child a couple seasons ago, you know what I mean? And so like Viserion and Rhaegal, who are Dany's other dragons, are like the good children, and Drogon's the Joffrey of the brood. But I really like that parallel.
So Dany asks Jon to clarify if Davos is being literal about the knife in the heart. Like Davos mentioned that he took a knife in the heart, and before Jon can clarify, who shows up but Ser Jorah, and they reunite, and I was incredibly moved by this, Joanna. Dany has gone the full cycle with Jorah, from like, he's kind of her advisor, to he's someone she really trusts, to like, oh wow, he actually betrayed her, to sending him away, but then like he comes and saves her life, but then he's got to send her away again because he's got grayscale. Now he's back again, and it just is so lovely. I thought it was great. What'd you think?
Yeah, I mean, I love Jorah.
Yep.
I love his new outfit. I thought it was a really good moment, and I thought Ian Glenn was doing a great job sort of registering the fact that like, okay, Dario's gone, which Dario was still around last time he was there. Dario's gone, but now there's this new handsome young dude hanging around Daenerys, and he's like, what the hell do I have to do? I flayed myself alive for you. But there's also this like hilarious discomfort because, Jon, there's so many scenes in this episode where someone basically goes, "I know your dad." Like Jon's like, "I served under your dad." And, Jorah says nothing.
Was that just like generic Game of Thrones accent you were doing just now, by the way?
It's an Eddie Izzard reference.
I see.
Bloody pilot fish, I know your dad. But the Jorah could have talked in that moment about Ned Stark and been like, I know your dad too. He exiled me for slave trading. But Jorah's just like uncomfortably silent in that moment. So I really liked that. Yeah.
So anyway, they
A lot
reunite.
of a lot of people in our chat room are wanting us to point out the fact that Jon is wearing the Mormont family sword, which has not been remarked upon yet in the show, but that's kind of Jorah's sword, that his dad gave to Jon instead. So
Well, we will see. I don't know. I doubt a reckoning will come from that, but yeah, that is interesting that he now has a sword, and it was not remarked upon in this episode. But anyway, moving on, we see a flock of birds that we're back at Winterfell. We see a flock of birds that Bran has warged into, and they fly vast distances. You see them fly over Eastwatch. They fly over the army of the undead until the Night King sees them, and they scatter. So then Bran wakes up and he says we should send ravens immediately, warning about the zombie threat. So ravens go out. I found this scene to be a little bit puzzling, Joanna. First of all, I thought the Raven CG was a pretty mixed bag. So some of it was good, some of it was pretty rough.
Spent all that cash on that dragon.
That's right. They put the money where it counted. But the idea that like Bran sending these ravens out warning about the zombie threat is some major event. Like what are they going to do differently? Prepare faster. It's felt weird to me. Like what did you take as the significance of this scene?
Well, they do prepare faster.
Yeah, I guess, but shouldn't they have theoretically been doing that already? Is my question.
The thing that I will say, I think the purpose of this scene, the function of this scene, is to remind us that Bran can warg inside of animals, which we haven't seen him do in a while, especially now that his direwolf is gone. Obviously he did it with Hodor, but he can do it with animals, that he can sort of spy. Like now we know that the Starks have this other superpower in their arsenal, which is like, bird spies, basically. But what we also know is that the Night King can sense when Bran is doing that and like sort of break the spell a little bit. So those are some like technical things that we learned or were reminded of. In terms of the ramifications, I mean, we can talk about that further on. But we do see people who don't believe Bran, which is the Archmaesters, and then people who do believe Bran right away, maybe when they should be more skeptical, which is Jon. So, and it does push the plot of this episode forward in terms of everyone hastily mobilizing and going north.
Gotcha. Well, it seems like Bran had a pretty important message he had to get to everyone really quickly, right?
Yeah.
And
he's like, there's a huge army of the dead, guys. Let's get these ravens out and in the mail.
And ravens, they're pretty awesome. I mean, in a medieval Westerosi-esque world, they're not a bad solution. But I have a feeling there's probably better solutions out there for someone trying to get the word out really, really quickly, right?
I think that's true. I personally have had a good experience with Stamps.com. Stamps.com is, if you are unfamiliar, Stamps.com is a service that will send you a scale in the mail, and you can print and post your postage at home. You don't have to go to the post office. You don't have to go up to the rookery where the ravens are and tie a little scroll to someone's foot. You can just take care of all of it at your desk. If you work from home like I do, and you don't want to have to deal with the post office at all, you can use Stamps.com to send all of your correspondence or packages or whatever you need. Is really, really easy and convenient.
Let me just stop there for a second. Do you mind is there any way you can do that again without saying the, like if you don't want to deal with, instead of saying if you don't want to deal with the post office at all, can you say if you don't want to deal with long lines at all?
Yep. Okay. Can I just say that and you can insert it in?
Yeah.
If you don't want to deal with long lines at all, you can use stamps.com.
Cool. Just because they're as I wrote in the notes, like they partner with the post office. Okay. Anything else we have to say about them? Joanna, that sounds pretty convenient. So like one of my least favorite things about mailing things is like waiting in lines. And like it's basically right now impossible to mail things from home because, or basically right now it's very difficult to mail things from home because if you have a package you want to get out to people, and I send things out all the time for podcast related things or whatever, it's hard to know what the weight of things are and how to pay for them and what the appropriate postage is. So like it sounds like stamps.com solves these problems.
Absolutely. With the scale that you can get from stamps.com, you can figure out precisely the postage you need. You don't have to randomly slap like 20 stamps on an envelope, which is something that I've been known to do.
Yeah, that was like my technique, is like putting like 50 forever stamps onto something,
And just hoping that it would work.
Yeah.
The other issue that I've run into when using more traditional services is the post office closes sometimes. And, if you're working late or something like that and you can't get there in time, you can still just do it all from home, and it's completely easy and convenient.
So someone in the chat room, Kaninu C, asks a really good question. Will stamps.com let you send a white to King's Landing? That's a tough one. That's a tough one.
I mean, and this is a perfect use of stamps.com because not all whites weigh the same. You might get like a super decomposed one that's just bones, or you might get like a freshly dead one that has a lot of meat on it. So you're going to want to plop it on that scale, get the exact right postage, mail that sucker to King's Landing, and then you and your 6 buddies don't even have to risk life and limb going north of the wall to get it, I think.
That sounds like a great deal. Speaking of deals, we have a deal for listeners to this podcast, right?
Absolutely. If you go to stamps.com and use the offer code KINGS, you get a 4-week trial, which includes postage and a digital scale. So go to stamps.com. Before you do anything else, click on the radio microphone at the top of the homepage and type in KINGS. That's stamps.com. Enter KINGS, and you never have to go to the post office again.
Yeah. Well, we really appreciate stamps.com for sponsoring us this week. And if you are a fan of this show and you find yourself needing to mail things, check that out. Stamps.com. Click on the podcast microphone. Use the code KINGS. We'd really appreciate you checking stamps.com out. They're a great supporter of us. Let's move on, Jonah Robinson. That was good, Jonah. I'm going to give it a little space here. Let's move on, Jonah Robinson, and let's go to Old Town. You were talking about how Sam was overhearing the Maesters talking about Bran's message, and Sam interrupts and says, "Hey, like, yeah, Bran is right. We gotta get on this thing." And the Maesters are really not super receptive to his message. I have to say, the Citadel seems kind of a lame bureaucratic nightmare based on the little bits that we've seen of it. What is your kind of overall sense of the Citadel based on the show's depiction? Is it different than in the books?
Different, but not wholly different. But I am kind of amazed at how quickly Sam was like, "It's been my lifelong dream to go to the Citadel. Bye-bye. I'm gone." Like, that was built up, and then so it's kind of interesting from a show mechanics point of view. You're like, okay, so Sam needed to go all the way down there to the Citadel to find out where the Dragonglass was, cure Jorah Mormont, get a bunch of books. Like, basically he Googled everything on the long night that they had in the library, stuffed that in a bag. Gilly's got a very explosive text of her own, and now they're heading back north with all that information. But yeah, I mean, I'm wondering if the scene where, all the Archmaesters are like, harumph, 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 we don't believe that this is a real kid with sight, is there not only to frustrate Sam, but also to make me less insane when Jon just like immediately believes it. When Jon, who 2 seconds ago thought Bran was dead, is like, oh, Bran's back according to the scroll. Also, I guess he has sight now. I don't know. No one explained it to me, but I believe it. It's all here on this tiny scroll. It's fine. This is fine. that's crazy that happened. So like the
Yeah.
whole scene of all of them being like, this can't be true, sort of helped me swallow that a little bit better, I think.
Right. 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 So anyway, Sam leaves a little bit discouraged, but we move on to another scene with Varys and Tyrion talking about Dany killing all the Lannisters on that field. Varys talks about the Mad King. They draw kind of a parallel between Dany's father, right? Dany's father and her, right? That it kind of makes Dany out to be more problematic than was originally thought, and maybe there's this idea that power inherently corrupts, and that there can never be a good ruler. So I don't know if the show's actually going in that direction, but it's kind of hinting at that. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I got a lot of emails this week actually asking me why I thought people think Daenerys is a good ruler. Whoa, I think we got one email that's something like, what does break the wheel even mean? If, like, because it kind of makes sense when Daenerys was an Essos and she's freeing slaves. But now that she's in Westeros, what is her platform that is so different from Cersei? She gets up there on that rock. I know it's earlier in the episode, but she gets up there on the rock. She's like, I'm not Cersei. I'm different. But also,
join me or die, basically.
I just roasted some people. You know what I mean? So, like, from their point of view, like, how is she different? Which is kind of interesting and complicated. I'm not sure the show is making it. I mean, we get this scene with Varys and Tyrion, but I'm not sure the show is making it as complicated as maybe they should be. Because I think we are still very much supposed to see Daenerys as this great hero and this very, like, liberal and progressive leader. But I'm like, I don't know that I see that yet, except for the fact that she like has a lot of non-white people working for her, so that's cool. But like, like I don't know. So I'm curious to see what plays out. I did float a theory last season that maybe Daenerys is being poised to be the villain of the series, and I think that would be fascinating.
That would be awesome. I think
everything I've seen since has led me to believe that that's not going to be the case. So yeah.
As you pointed out, Jon finds out that Bran and Arya are alive, and also that Bran has the ability to warg, and I guess he's cool with all that, right? And then he's like, I gotta go home. So they're in the Dragonstone planning room, and that's when Tyrion proposes the dumbest plan.
I don't know if is it the dumbest plan?
The dumbest plan in the history of dumb plans, at least this season. A white hunt, as you write here in the show notes. His rationale is, if we capture a white and bring it back to Cersei, certainly she will see this and then realize that we need to join forces to defeat the armies of the North, and maybe we won't hate each other as much, right?
Right.
So there are many reasons why this is dumb, in my opinion.
Okay.
The primary one being that, why do they think that that's actually going to in any way change Cersei's mind? Like, even me, who is not in that situation, having only casual knowledge of Cersei, understand that Cersei is either going to be unmoved or figure out a way to use the situation to her advantage. Another thing is, Cersei already has a dead person walking amongst her in the mountain. It's not like she doesn't believe in, magical zombies. And so the idea that this would be like a game-changing thing, it sounds to me to be rather like ludicrous on its face. They don't actually know if they can transport a white that far without the white dying or some other damage coming to it. And they were, of course, risking a massive amount of, they're risking a lot to send these important people to go get this white. So it just feels like a really dumb plan to me. But Joanna, what are your thoughts on this plan?
Well, in the after episode interview, one of the showrunners, Dan Weiss, basically talked about how this was inspired by a book / season 1 plotline where Alistair Thorne was supposed to take like a still moving arm from that white that came into Castle Black down to King's Landing. And in the books, like the disconnected arm doesn't make it. This is a quote from the book. He's trying to show Tyrion actually, and it says, Sir Alistair frowned uncomfortably. It rotted to pieces while I waited, unheard. There's not left to show but bones. And then Tyrion makes fun of him, and the whole court laughs at him. So basically, like, someone has tried to bring part of a white WIGHT down to King's Landing before, and so I think that inspired Weiss and Benioff to be like, why not a whole body? So I think they really just wanted to do like another North of the Wall big fight episode. I mean, here's the deal. I hear all of your complaints about this episode. I completely understand them. I think it's setting us up for what I hope will be a very good episode next week.
Yeah.
And I wonder if they stick the landing on that episode, if we will forgive them for all the groaning mechanisms that got us there. You know?
I don't know, Joanna. I mean, I think like in the past, something you've said a couple times on the podcast, and you know, tell me if I'm characterizing you correctly, but you said like the action is not. Oh, wait a little bit. You said the action is not impressive or moving or impactful if the circumstances that led up to it, or you know, the character motivations that led up to it, aren't done well, aren't executed well, right? Like, it's the character dynamics that are more interesting than the actual action, right?
Absolutely, and I still believe that. But I think leading up to is important. But I think in the context, I think my bigger issues have been dishonest character motivations within the context of, or inconsistent character motivations within the context of the battle. So if you're referring to either the Battle of the Bastards or the Battle for Castle Black, like, those are issues I have with those battle episodes. So I guess I'm not saying don't criticize this episode, do it all you want, but I just will be curious if next week delivers us not just action, because of course, no, if it's just action, I'm not going to be interested.
Right.
But if it delivers us not just action, but really interesting, compelling, emotional interactions between these 7 characters that they've sent north of the wall, plus the other extraneous stuff that they plan to do next week. I'm just curious if, like, the complaints of this week's episode, which are not unfounded, but if they fade in the face of if they stick the emotional and technical and action landing of next week's episode, which is 71 minutes long, the longest episode of Game of Thrones ever. So I'm just curious. I'm not saying it will. I am genuinely curious.
I am genuinely curious as well. I want to read the rest of High Call's email from Malaysia. He writes in, this isn't even getting into the dumbness of the plan Dany's council comes up with. Felt like the writers, for whatever reason, wanted a Dirty Dozen-esque mission beyond the wall, filled with the most badass warriors of Westeros, with the exception of Brienne, and reverse-engineered most of the episode to make it happen. The idea of ceasing the Great War for Westeros seems like a way to delay killing off Cersei, which from a certain perspective opens up some interesting possibilities. Maybe it allows the writers to avoid an entirely humans versus ice zombies final season, as Joanna has previously voiced trepidation for. But it also makes no logical sense. Why is there now a sense of urgency with dealing with the White Walkers to the point where Dany has to delay her ambitions? They've been marching on the wall for literally years. Why the sudden apparent ticking clock? Unfortunately, this can't be just swept aside. With only 8 episodes left, this dumb plan will help decide the ending of this show. I really hope the writers haven't written themselves into a corner here. End quote.
I don't disagree with anything that says. I do think they are bending and twisting themselves so that they can keep Cersei as a potential villain for season 8, because I do think ice zombies versus humans is boring.
Yeah. I think you're right. Like, I see what they're doing. I actually support what they're doing. I think you're right that ice zombies versus humans is not as interesting as humans versus humans.
Right.
But yeah, they really had. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, and I agree that they probably reversed engineered to get to this Dirty Dozen or Magnificent Seven or Seven Samurai or Avengers or whoever, or Ocean's 11.
I think you
or
mean
whatever you want to say.
I think you mean Snowshins 11.
I think you mean Snowshins 7. So yeah,
Magnificent
whatever.
Snowvin. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Snow White and the 7 Swords.
Nice.
That was tweeted at me today.
I like that one.
So the yeah, I completely agree that that's what they've done, that they've reversed engineered to get here, which is inelegant storytelling. And that being said,
Victor Di Giovanni says just Ice League in the chat room. That's pretty good.
that being said, like unlike the whole like Jamie should have been captured and then released, I think that that's like a really brilliant easy fix. I don't know what the smart fix is here. The smart fix is for them to have more time to make it seem less crazy. And I'll need to go back and watch, but I feel like Bran's vision, he sees them near Eastwatch, which is where they end up going, but like that's close. I know the Night King and his peeps have been marching around up there for freaking 6 seasons, but like that's the closest to the wall they've gotten. So like he's like, hey, they're not just marching around in circles anymore, like, you know, they lost their GPS or something like that. They're now marching on a physical landscape or landmark that we know of. I think that's true.
Yeah,
and
I think that's true. But again, like, you know, I'm not expecting anyone else in the world to have made my devil's bargain with the show. But my devil's bargain with the show is I will not care about logistics if you do not use logistics as like a character motivator,
right,
you know?
Right.
And so it does feel like kind of like, okay, you want me to not care about how, you know, so-and-so got to Dragonstone in 1 episode, but you do want me to care about these ice zombies that after like 6 years are finally going to be a danger. I think you're asking a little bit too much of me, show.
And I also think, well, here, let me say a couple other things. John gets this raven. He's like, okay, I got to go back. First of all, my 2 siblings that I actually like are alive and at home, so I kind of want to go see them. If ice zombies are like coming marching on the wall, I need to be there to protect Arya because she's my favorite. Like that's, you know, John's like, I gotta go. It's not like there's this threat, come help me. He's like, I'm gonna go home. And Daenerys is like, shit, I really like this guy though, and I don't want him to go home.
Right.
Like, can we figure something else out? And he's like, well, if we just go get this white, you know, then like maybe I don't have to go home permanently, and we can all work together, and you can fight with me, and it'll be sexy fighting ice zombies times. Like there seem to be some ways in which this did have more urgency, like a reason for Daenerys to try to figure out a way to work with Jon that didn't give up her fight with Cersei. But it just really, to me, flies in the face of the character of Daenerys, because like, why is the Iron Throne so important to her if she's this great savior of men? Why does she need to fight Cersei now? If she's such a good person, wouldn't she just go with Jon? Like, if Daenerys needed proof that there are zombies, like, this would make more sense to me. To prove it to Cersei, as you say already,
she doesn't, because she saw those drawings last week, right? So
yeah, chalk equals truth.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So anyway.
Well, Joanna, I'm angry for the opposite rean. You know,
which is I'm not angry.
Like I'm furious for the opposite reason, which is that like why would she put a pause in her ambition to go on this cockamamie plan? Like
why you want to ask a woman to give up her career for some man? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, for that crazy, you know, plan that this guy has to find this white and bring it back. It's like I can't recall another scene. I literally cannot recall another scene in the entire history of the series where every single line of dialogue that was spoken, like every subsequent line of dialogue in that scene, I just was making my head explode because the logical part of my mind was rebelling against everything that was happening. Like, there's no way these characters would be okay with this stupid plan.
Okay, so Ming Liu in the chat room says Cersei may still have a formidable force that will attack while Daenerys' attention is turned away elsewhere. Yes, we understand that. She says exactly, explicitly that in the scene. But what I'm saying is, like, she should take all of her Dothraki. She should go. Remember Grey Worm in the Unsullied? Daenerys doesn't, but I do. She should go get them from Castle Rock, and they should all go north. And Cersei can attack whatever the fuck she wants. Sorry, excuse my language. Because like that's not what's important. If she believes Jon, then Daenerys should give up her pursuit of the Iron Throne for the good of mankind, which is what she claims to be fighting for, and go up north with him with all of her forces. And then, you know, Cersei is welcome to attack an empty Dragonstone if she wants to.
I also just don't understand why Daenerys doesn't just bring the dragons up with her and just end this whole White Walker march in like 5, you know, minutes. Do you know what I mean?
That's why the chalk, I'm sorry. Now I feel like we're spiraling down into negativity, but like
Sorry.
which I don't want to do, but like the chalk drawings don't make any sense to me. I wish Daenerys didn't believe that they exist.
Mm.
And so we needed to prove it to Daenerys, and that would explain why she's not going up there with the
Right,
dragons
right.
yet,
Because otherwise,
she
she should
doesn't
just
believe
head
it.
up there.
Otherwise, she should go with him because she's got those dragons.
End this conflict like tomorrow by bringing the dragons up.
That would make more sense. Here's one thing in that Dragonstone war room that did make a lot of sense to me.
Yes.
And it was Jorah being like, "Oh, I'll go." Oh, you need someone to die? I will die for you, Khaleesi.
Yeah.
That's what I do. Can I turn myself into a white? Would that be helpful? I will go north of the wall, find the Night's King, have him kill me, resurrect, and then drag my rotting self back just to do whatever you want, because I am that kind of lapdog for you. Jorah, pitch perfect in that scene.
I agree. I agree. It made a lot of that was the one character moment in that scene that made sense to me. So okay, so they go up and they're like, let's do this thing, and eventually they get there. I'm just gonna skip to the end on this one. They land at Eastwatch. I thought Eastwatch looked spectacular. Just the way it was constructed, it looked amazing. Tormund and Beric and the Hound are there. Thoros are there, and they all decide, hey, like I guess we're the only ones that can do this. And then they head out, and I guess their mission is to bring back a white, right? Like that's the whole
They
plan.
had another round of I know your dad. That scene was so funny where it's like, hey, I know you. Hey, I know you. Hey, I know you. Which I don't know. It was like, here's the thing. Here's the thing.
Yep,
the writing's not good as far as I'm concerned. The acting is pretty great. It's like there's the pleasure of having, I mean, first of all, everything that Tormund says in this episode is gold. Also, Richard Dormer, who plays Beric Dondarrion, he has crazy lines that he has to read, and he reads them beautifully. The Hound, Thoros, like that's all great. And then, Gendry's trying and whatever. But
Gendry's trying.
He's trying. I feel like the promise of Gendry was more than the actual like reality of Gendry. Everyone's like, bring Gendry back, and then Gendry's back. You're like, all right, he's got a hammer. That's pretty cool. All right. Anyway, I don't know. I think that they broke a lot of narrative rules to get where they are, but I am really interested and excited to see these 7 characters work together.
I agree. I'm curious how they're going to make it work next episode. But yeah, I guess for me, the mechanics of the plan were so unbelievable that this final scene with them heading off into the snow had absolutely no emotional resonance for me, because again, like I need to believe that there's a reason the King of the North and these other assortment of random characters from seasons 1 through 6 are like heading out there, and I didn't feel like the show really like gave us a compelling reason why they would all decide to do this.
Okay, let's consider this. Something I talked about a lot last week was the sort of like father figures who shaped these Stark kids when they didn't have like Ned Stark around to help them. And first of all, I believe that Ned Stark would have like gone up with this campaign. I do believe that's something he would do. And also Lord Commander Mormont like went north of the wall with Jon in tow to find out what the hell was going on. Like that was an example he had, which is like, if you're in charge, you go. That's what you do. You're in charge. It's your responsibility. So, and the idea that the wildlings wouldn't pay attention to anyone who wasn't Jon is also probably true. So, they stretch logic, but I think they don't break logic.
No, that's fair. Those are fair points. Those were, that didn't necessarily bother me as much as just like the idea that they're all imperiling themselves for a chance at capturing a white that may or may not make it back to King's Landing in one piece, which may or may not actually influence Cersei. Okay, I've said my piece on this. I won't keep going on about it.
Okay.
But really difficult to get past that one, Joanna. Okay, but let's move on. A few other things happened this episode. Tyrion and Davos go to King's Landing.
Yeah.
Tyrion meets with Bronn and Jaime in the crypts. Apparently, Bronn negotiated this meeting under the like guise of training Jaime. And we already talked about Jaime and Tyrion having that tense reunion, and Tyrion kind of saying like, hey, there may be a chance for some kind of peace, right? Or at least delaying Cersei bending the knee. And Cersei seems to be interested. She's open to this whole audience that will lead to her being convinced, that there are threats from the north.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, they also Davos finds Gendry in Flea Bottom. Now, the thing I was wondering is there a reason for Davos to do this? Like, did he just want to make sure Gendry was okay?
Yeah, I mean, he put him in a boat and he told him to row towards King's Landing from Dragonstone many seasons ago. And
Right.
so, yeah, I mean, is there a reason to do it? Yes. Is it a great reason? No. Is it more likely that the show just wanted Gendry back on the Avengers team that's going north of the wall? Yes, I think it's a little bit of a stretch, but they kind of got there.
I did think it was funny, a few funny moments in this episode. One of them being, he said, I thought you'd still be rowing, which is a long time show watcher joke, right?
You thought that was funny? I thought it was hokey. I thought it was really hokey.
Basically, we like completely opposite things.
Well, Joe Dempsey was in the opening credits. He's actually billed above Ian Glenn in the opening credits.
Joe Dempsey plays Gendry, right?
Gendry, yeah. And Joe Dempsey a couple of years ago tweeted still rowing, like in one of the off seasons when he wasn't on the show. And that's where the whole Gendry still rowing joke started, was this Joe Dempsey tweet from a couple seasons ago. So everyone's been joking ever since that he's been rowing like ever since. And so it was a nod to that, but I just felt like it was a little too on the nose. I did like, I liked the antics on the beach with Davos and Tyrion and Gendry, even though it ended in horrific violence. Davos's whole like fermented crab bit I liked.
Yeah, I thought it was very funny.
I thought it was funny. Gendry has this warhammer. His dad, King Robert Baratheon, also used a warhammer. Gendry has put the Baratheon sigil on his warhammer. It's got the antlers of House Baratheon, so he's like really leaning into like basically cosplaying his dad, which is kind of fun. And then we did get this meeting between Gendry and Jon on Dragonstone, which is it's a nice callback to when Robert and Ned first meet in season 1 after a long time, and Robert's like, you got fat, and Ned's like looks at him like, you're one to talk, buddy, and instead it's like, Jon being like, you're a lot leaner than your dad, and Gendry being like, you're super short, dude, and and then them laughing uproariously, and now they're best friends. So yeah, Gendry's back.
Yeah, and I'm a fan. Anyway, so let's move to there's just 2 other plot lines we're going to talk about. One of them is what happens at the Citadel. You already mentioned that Sam left, but before he did, he and Gilly have this conversation where Sam's barely listening as Gilly's reading through the books, and Gilly drops a major bombshell, Joanna, which is, if I understand correctly, that there's this whole other Targaryen named Rhaegar, right? No, I'm just joking. She drops a major bombshell about Rhaegar and Lyanna, the implication being that Rhaegar actually had a quote-unquote secret wedding with Lyanna. Now, I don't know how secret it is if this Maester is actually writing about it, but okay, whatever. They have a secret wedding, which means that theoretically Jon Snow has a better claim to the throne than Dany, right?
Yeah.
So I thought it was kind of hilarious. It was a very kind of book reader trolling moment, right? Because I bet every book reader is freaking out at that moment, and most show watchers were like, huh? Right?
And Sam's like, yada, yada, yada. Let's move on. Someone in the chat room brings up something I was going to say, which is like, it's not like this Maester was writing about it in a book he published. This is like his private journal where he talks about how many shits he took. But Gilly is, just doing her basic reading 101, thanks to Shireen and Sam for teaching Gilly how to read so that she could find out this major thing just lurking in some old Septon's private diary. So, yeah. Stephanie Carlson in the chat room goes, "Dear Diary, what a day."
Indeed. Matt Malone asks a question in the chat room. How can you get a marriage annulled after you've had children?
Yeah, it's a good question. Also, there's no such thing as annulment in the religion of the Seven,
Mm.
which is what the Targaryens loved polygamy before they became like respectful rulers of Westeros. Well, for a while even then, but eventually they like came over to the faith, the light of the Seven. Um, Annulments and divorces and that sort of thing doesn't really work. Here's a couple pieces of information. One is that Rhaegar's first wife, Ilia Martell, who's Oberyn Martell's sister, which is why, he gets so mad. He's like, you raped her, you murdered her, blah, blah, blah. He's talking about his sister, Ilia Martell, who was Rhaegar's first wife. She could have no more children. So she had 2 children. Rhaegar believed in a prophecy that he needed 3 children because the dragon has 3 heads. He thought he needed another child. His wife couldn't give him one. So my extrapolation is that this is sort of like a Henry VIII situation where he's like, hey, church, guess what? I'm the king. He's not the king yet. I'm the prince. So I get an annulment, right? And they're like, okay. So I think that's how that happened.
Is secret wedding in the books, or is that
No, this is new information.
Net new information for everyone in the Game of Thrones universe. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So did you already know about it when you started watching the episode, or did it drop for you during the episode too?
I knew about it.
I see. Okay. Well, and how does it make you feel? Are you like, do you think it like complicates the world in an interesting way?
Yeah, of course, because here's how it complicates the world. It radically alters the identities, the self-identities of the two main characters of Game of Thrones, right? Daenerys thinks she's A, the last Targaryen, B, has the right by blood to the throne. Those are like 2 of her most self-identifying things. And she's the mother of dragons, yada, yada. Okay. Jon believes he is A, Ned Stark's son, and B, a bastard. Those are his 2, and he came back from the dead, yada, yada. So, all those things are not true, right? Jon Snow's not a bastard. He's not Ned Stark's son. He doesn't know any of this yet. Daenerys is not the last Targaryen. She does not have a blood claim to the throne. I mean, she does, but it's not as good as Jon's. So yeah, it's a huge game-changing thing. But the question is, since the show these days, I believe, is playing so fast and loose with the right of succession, I don't know how much of a game changer it will be in the end. I suspect the potential incest bomb that's waiting to drop on Daenerys and Jon will be a big deal, that they won't be too delighted to find out that they're related. But I don't know about this whole, I'm not a bastard. Hopefully that'll be very interesting and compelling for Jon. But yeah.
On that note, one of my coworkers brought something up today. I don't know if you ever experienced this, Joanna, but when people find out that you host a Game of Thrones podcast, everyone wants to talk with you about Game of Thrones. Has that ever happened to you? Can you imagine something like that?
Yeah.
So one of my coworkers talked to me today about this theory that Tyrion is a Targaryen. Have you heard of this?
Of course.
Yeah,
I think we talked about it on this show.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what is the idea is that Tyrion was actually born to Lyanna, is it?
No, I really hate this theory, but I will go through it anyway.
Okay, we don't have to go through it if you don't.
No, I want to.
Yeah.
I don't hate it the way I hated the Sansa pregnancy thing. I don't like the idea that when Tywin says you're no son of mine, he literally means you're no son of mine.
Right.
I think thematically that's not as interesting as Tywin not being able to accept his own son.
Agreed,
right?
completely, 100%.
But some people take that to be literal, and there's this whole thing of how Joanna Lannister, which is Tyrion's mom, that Daenerys' dad, the Mad King Aerys, fancied her, and so perhaps either had an affair with her or perhaps even raped her, and so Tyrion would be Daenerys' half brother, because secretly a Targaryen. Secret Targaryen is this whole thing. It's like And there's a lot of secret Targaryens in the books potentially. So Jon is one and Tyrion is potentially another. And that's why a lot of people think, that we talked before about Tyrion's interaction with the dragons and Jon interactions with the dragons. And if they're both Targaryens, secretly Targaryens, then maybe they're both supposed to like ride dragons. And it's like there's this whole prophecy about the dragon has 3 heads. There will be 3 riders, so that, in season 8, but potentially we would get Tyrion and Jon and Daenerys all riding dragons fighting ice zombies. I don't think that's what's going to happen. I really don't think Tyrion is a secret Lannister, but that is a very common...
A secret Targaryen.
Oh, sorry, a secret Targaryen. That is a very common and much cherished theory. So
interesting. All right. Well, one other thing happens at Winterfell this week, and that is that Arya's Arya has this weird interaction with Sansa where it shows like, hey, even though these people have both been through incredibly humbling and life-transforming events, they still kind of have this old dynamic where they're sibling rivals in some way, or they still kind of rub each other the wrong way a little bit. Arya then creeps on Littlefinger as he hunts down a copy of an old Raven scroll from Master Wolkan, and she finds an old Sansa letter, which we then later see that Littlefinger planted it for her to find. This is a letter from season 1, and I believe you've written an explainer about it. And probably if you Google the internet asking what the heck is going on with this letter, you'll find Joanna's article. But Joanna, would you like to explain it for us?
Oh, did that happen to you?
I'm actually just guessing, but yes.
Yes, I did write an explainer about this. This is a letter that Sansa wrote. Okay, so basically what happened, and this is the most like maddeningly unexplained element of the episode, I think. I think the writers thought they were being a lot clearer than they were. But basically, we found in a couple episodes, right, that there's a copy of every single Raven scroll that was ever sent to Winterfell at Winterfell, right? And Littlefinger sort of clocked this knowledge a couple episodes ago and held on to it. And so in this episode, we see him request that scroll in a very ostentatious manner, and also sort of imply that it was Sansa's request that he do that, because he says, Lady Stark thanks you for this, right? And he does this all very flashily, sort of in front of Arya to lay a trap for Arya. Leaves the scroll, hides it pretty well, actually, but Arya still finds it because he wanted her to find it. And she finds it, and it's this letter that Sansa wrote back in season 1 when Robert's dead and Ned's been arrested and Cersei and Littlefinger and Varys and Pycelle are all pressuring Sansa to write this letter. I mean, Varys is kind of a silent actor, but they're all there asking Sansa to write a letter to Robb that says, like, come to King's Landing, bend the knee, father has committed treason. Basically they told Sansa, like, this is her best chance to save Ned, was to get her brother in line. And then, back in season 1, we see Robb get this letter at Winterfell, read it and be like, Sansa wrote this. And Maester Luwin, who was at Winterfell at the time, is like, Sansa wrote it, but this is the Queen's words.
It's the Queen's words, yeah.
And so Robb then immediately calls all his bannermen. Like, that letter actually incited Robb to, like, get all the Northern bannermen to, go, I don't know, go to war.
He's like, I'm gonna go down there. I'm gonna go down there with my army. That's what he basically says.
Me and what army? The Northern Army.
Yeah.
And so, so the implication here is that Arya would see this letter. She doesn't know any of that context. So Arya would see this letter and sort of think ill of Sansa for writing it, think that Sansa thought their father was a traitor when she didn't, and all this other stuff. And we have yet to see how that will play out. But since I was just complaining about Littlefinger being, like, stupid, I don't think that I can really complain about Littlefinger, like, getting one over on Arya, even though Arya seems to, like, supernaturally be able to see through people's ruses. So, but Arya's pretty dumb if she believes that Sansa wrote this letter, like, in earnest. But that kind of seems to be the implication. She looks troubled when she reads it, and then we see Littlefinger was watching her the whole time and was like, this is the result he wanted, was for her to get the scroll and be troubled by it.
Yeah. I mean, I would just say that I thought the whole sequence was, forget about Arya being dumb and Littlefinger pulling one over on her. I just thought the staging of it was really silly. Like, it just felt like so kind of old school. Like it felt like cartoony almost. It felt like it was from like a cartoon in like the 90s or something, of like evil villain plants something for, you know, hero to find and trick her into thinking that someone's evil or something like that. It just it felt extremely silly, and you know, and then the fact that, as you already pointed out, they don't do a very good job of explaining what the heck is actually going on. So not, you know, of all the scenes, of all the sequences I've seen on Game of Thrones, Joanna Robinson, this one with Littlefinger and Arya was one of them. That's what I have to say about it. What'd you think?
I think it's just very confusing for people. Based on the number of people who Googled and found the article that I wrote, it was very, very confusing.
Yeah.
And like, there's one thing to leaving something for people to sort of figure out. I don't know. I really don't know if they expected us to remember that Sansa wrote that letter from season 1, or because I know that some people thought maybe it was like a fake letter that Littlefinger had planted, but it's a real letter. You know, it's just there's too many variables that weren't laid out very cleanly. So I don't know about that at all.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it was like 2011, right, when season 1 of Game of Thrones aired.
You mean everyone doesn't rewatch it every year? Is that what you're telling me?
Barack Obama was president of the United States.
Yeah.
We assassinated Osama bin Laden. You know, like it was a whole different world back then. Is what I'm saying. So the idea that people would still remember that is a little presumptive. That being said, fortunately, you have podcasts like A Cast of Kings to tell you guys what's up. So as we wrap up, Joanna, any closing thoughts on this week's episode? Sounds like you were a fan overall.
I wasn't bothered by it when I was watching it, but then a lot of people were like, "Here are my issues."
But then
and
you
I'm
had
like,
this really irritating Cast of Kings co-host that was like
no,
threw a wet blanket on everything.
no. I mean, I see where you are coming from. I think what's maybe something that's happened is that like I was so down on the series in season 5. Season 6 was sort of like a mixed bag, but I had enough people sort of yelling at me for a couple years to lower my expectations of Game of Thrones that now they're pretty low. I mean, it's still, I know that's not accurate. I still think it's a great show. I just don't have the same expectations for it anymore. And I've said that before. And I don't think that's a crime. Like, I don't think it's a crime to say that this is a different show, that they're the same characters and you know, they're trying really hard to lean on a lot of season 1. There's so many season 1 callbacks in this particular season of Game of Thrones. It's really insane. And so, you know, they're sort of like, it's almost like a reboot. Like they're trying to get our nostalgia working for Ned Stark or whatever it is. But that being said, I'm really excited for next week. And if they pull it off, we were really high on last week, right? Other than the cliffhanger at the end, which was a sour note. We really loved last week's episode. I have no way of knowing, but I think next week's is going to be a really good episode. So my hope is that our issues of this episode fade away. In the meantime.
I join you in hoping that. But for me, this was a unfortunate juxtaposition of one of my favorite Game of Thrones episodes of all time with one of my least favorite episodes. It doesn't take away from the dramatic accomplishments of last week. Yeah. But it really does. I'm like High Call, who emailed into us at acastofkings@gmail.com. I'm worried, like this whole plot, which, you know, I've heard a bunch of people I respect like commenting on how silly it seems, this whole plot to bring back a white. Like, High Call is right. Like, this could determine the rest of the show. It could determine a good number of the remaining, 8 or 9 episodes. Like, what happens, and that's very concerning to me. But we'll see. The show has recovered from like really silly things in the past, as you pointed out. So I am looking forward to seeing what happens next week.
The show recovered from I think season 5 is a bad season. Having just rewatched it recently, I think that is a bad season of Game of Thrones, and the show recovered from that. In my opinion,
I thought season 2 was pretty rough. That was like my least favorite season until now.
Right.
But
but yeah, hope springs eternal.
The show's recovered. It's very possible. So all that being said, in the meantime, where can people find more of your work on the internet, Joanna Robinson?
You can find me on vanityfair.com. You can email us, castofkings@gmail.com, but I don't know that I'll be reading emails this week because I think a lot of you guys are just going to yell at us for being too negative. So you can also find me on Twitter at Joe Wrote This, but don't at me your annoyance at this episode being too negative.
All right. Well, you can direct all your annoyance at me at Dave Chensky. That's Dave Chen SKY on Twitter. And find all my stuff at davechen.net. I host another podcast called the /filmcast at /filmcast.com. Thanks for listening. Thanks to stamps.com for sponsoring us. We'll see you next week.